Maji, I think you set the stage very nicely. Before, I was thinking for this podcast, I was thinking maybe we need to ground the audience because there is a lot of interest in this topic. And I know I'm going to talk a little bit of basic information, but what is mental, right? I mean, the question comes up to me because a lot of people don't catch it on average until they're, I think the data shows 11 years until they're suffering from depression or nervousness or anxiety. They don't know until they're on average 11 years in the US, and they go for a psychologist or something, to a psychiatrist for a treatment. So mental health, the definition in the Oxford Dictionary is the physical, the social well-being, the emotional well-being, and psychological well-being. So that's what they've said. And in the Cambridge Dictionary, they said absence of any mental illness, right? So it's interesting to see the definitions that it's overall well-being in terms of, and also how they cope up with the day-to-day situations of what life throws at them, right? How are they able to cope up and live a life of fulfillment and joy, right? So that's the definition part of it. Now, the essentially what I have understood is that there is a lack of awareness in the system, in the human system, meaning that we go into the education system and learn about A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it immediately goes from preschool to kindergarten and first grade. And we talk about rhymes and history and math and science, but there is no aspect of covering how a mind works, how a thoughts are formed. It's so interesting to see that there is no education system around that, how a thought is formed. I mean, even a kid doesn't ask about, like, how do I get this thought, right?
And I love that. That's such a, it's such a basic thing to, to recognize, right? That, what is missing in our in our educational system. How about how to take care of ourselves? It's very basic, but it's a life skill that people will often finish college with and do not know. And I mean that from the standpoint, I mean, certainly mental health is definitely, but even from the perspective of like physical health, what do you do? How do you take care of yourself? Knowing basic anatomy, understanding how your body works, even from the physiological things of like your own anatomical physiological develop, we don't really have that. So I'm going to give you an example. My daughter is 9 years old, and a couple months ago my husband said, this is probably time for you to start thinking about having talks with her about her menstrual cycle. And I thought, she's 9, that's not going to happen for a while. And then I had to think back. I go, ooh, when's the first time that I spotted, right? The very first sign, which can happen years before you ever get a first menstrual cycle. But I thought, oh, I was 10 years old. Maybe I do need to think about having this conversation with her because she's 9. So 2 things happened. One was like that shock of, oh my gosh, I didn't have that education. I didn't have the awareness of what was happening with my body at the time that things started happening, which feels frightening because you feel unprepared. And then the other part is me saying to him, wait a minute, this doesn't fall on me. This is not my responsibility alone. You are her parent. And one of those things that actually matters is 2 things with relation to that. One, parents together can have those conversations with their children, right? Families can have those conversations with children to prepare them for their growth. The second part, especially from a gendered perspective, that men, the fathers, right, need to be a part of those discussions as well for us to destigmatize even talking about something as physiologically normal as a menstrual cycle, right? I think even, I'm sure that the listeners may, when I said spotting a menstrual cycle, they go, whoa, where's this conversation going, right? Because in our society, it's taboo. It's taboo to talk about things that are actually quite normal for us to talk about. And we have to have these conversations, because if we can't even have a conversation about that, how can we expect ourselves as a society to have even more complex and complicated conversations, such as things like mental health? So I'm putting that out there as an invitation for those of you who are listening. Think about, what are the things that I shy away from speaking about? And how is that affecting me? And more importantly, if you're a parent, how is that affecting my children? And if you're a leader, how is that affecting those whom I lead, right? This goes back to like this bigger picture of all of the different things that you and I have been talking about. So I love how you I love how you bring that in terms of how are we not preparing children in the very basic education system that we have, which should prepare children for not just being good citizens, but for being prepared for life. So I love that.
Yep, and thank you. I think, and let me just take a little bit more depth onto what you have said, right? So, if it's not in the education system, now what is happening is each time your awareness is getting into multiple places, right? We tell kids all the time, and we tell, baby, can you focus? When they're like, did we ever tell them what is focus means? Why don't you concentrate on one thing? Like, what is concentration? Concentration is actually awareness in one area in your mind, in the entire existence. It is like that. You don't want to think about anything else. But we don't go to that specific point. We just say, why don't you concentrate? Why can't you concentrate a few minutes? And that's one of the stigmas we'll talk about later in this podcast, is that even parents don't know, society doesn't know how to bring forward a human being, and make him or her more thriving in their life. That's where the foundation is. When I talk about foundation of mental health, if we don't start very early in the beginning of the childhood, now already that human being has practiced enough distraction. Now, what do you expect? Master of distraction when you grow up, right? So therefore, that person cannot focus anymore, and all sorts of nervousness and anxiety and all those come. And then you start meditation and all that. It's a little bit of too late. It's difficult to go backwards and unlearn yourself of what you have learned and then start over, right? And that's the challenge we are having, because as you grow up into an adult, you would be expected some responsibilities and things like that, and you would shy away from saying, oh, my mental health is not correct, I can't focus, because it will be a stigma, right? And that, just relating to the topic we are having, the demand part of it, right? And I've looked at online. So Mental Health Institute says 12.5% in the US are suffering from either anxiety or nervousness or some kind of depression. That's 1 in 8 people in the US itself. That's a lot of numbers, right? And that's because, again, going back to like managing your awareness and understanding how thought patterns are formed, how one can focus in their life and achieve the things they want. Let me stop here.
No, I love that. That's absolutely true. I love how you bring up even the way that we talk about focus. And I would say it's as much telling the kid, like, why aren't, focus and pay attention and, all of these different things in a world that is increasingly designed to cater to shorter lifespan or shorter attention spans. Social media, like the scrolling, even the way, even swiping left and right on dating apps, right? We are increasingly creating a world that is requiring us to have shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter attention spans. And so this is really interesting because we have this growing, let's say, like as an epidemic of people with ADHD or ADD. And we have seen ADD and ADHD as a mental illness, as a learning disability, as like all of these different things. And be very careful. The wording that we're using is quite negative. And it puts the onus basically on the person, right? That something is wrong with the person, the child, right? Because we diagnose this very early generally. Something is wrong with the child, with the way that the child's mind works. But we're not recognizing this is not the child. This is not the person. This is the environment that we're growing in, that we're growing up in. This is the environment that we're constantly being exposed to in every different thing, in our watches, in our, like, all of the technology, all of these different things. That has an effect. That has repercussions and ramifications for how our brains develop. And so we have to learn to kind of see this not just as a mental health is a personal responsibility. Sure, it is as part of taking care of yourself. Mental health is also a collective responsibility in terms of looking at the bigger picture of how it fits in the scope and the scheme of other things that are outside of us. And so I feel like, it goes back to like, these things are always complex. These things are always nuanced. These conversations need to be nuanced in order for us to understand how is it is it that we're continuing to move in this direction? And more importantly, how do we improve either the direction that we're going or the systems that we have in place to counteract or alleviate the growing problem?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned is very apt, very correct, and very relevant to the topic here in terms of the ADHD, right? There is a misconception thinking that it is a disease or something. We need to treat it or something, right? But you understand that it's a person's awareness is being moving in different directions. I mean, we all of our awareness moves, right? But then person with ADHD, maybe it's a little bit more challenging for them because awareness is constantly moving. And you mentioned that in the beginning of this podcast as well, that it's so interesting that the technology and then the cars, electric cars, the chat GPT, artificial intelligence is slowly making its way. Well, I shouldn't say slowly, it's much faster. It's uh, I'm being aware of what I'm talking. So it's making its way very fast now into the generation, and the next generation, it's called alpha generation for the kids who are born after 2010. You're talking about voice activated systems, right? Driverless cars, self-driving cars. Now, what is happening with all this, the wheel of time, is everybody wants the piece of it, right? If you are a teenager or an adult, you would be forced into certain things during the day, and you don't have choice, but you are actually doing the things because everybody wants the piece of time from you, right? And that's the problem, that GPS calculating exactly to the minute where you are reaching the destination.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I think people are so caught up in the rat race, right? Of going to work and doing this, and the restless, there's always something to be done part. And it is so based on this artificial construct of time, right? We're all sufferers of it. But especially in our society, right? Because it varies. I know you understand this concept, and those of you who are from other countries or have been in other countries understand that, there's this, we joke about international standard time. Time is like, it's a guideline in other countries. It is not this like, we value punctuality here because we have this idea that my time is valuable and my time is finite, and if you are coming late, then you do not respect my time, which I feel like we end up extending and projecting too many things onto this issue of time or encroachment on somebody else's time. And yet when we have that understanding that what matters is not achievement and the amount of meetings that we are in or the amount of books that you write that is not what matters in life. When you are on your deathbed, looking back on your life, you're not going to be proud of how many meetings you arrived to on time. You're going to be proud of the things that actually make an impact. And I feel like this is such a foundational piece to mental health as a whole, to understanding that we are often caught up in the things that don't really matter. They feel like they matter, but they don't necessarily actually matter when you think of it from a more existential maybe lens of what truly matters in life. You know what truly matters? Community, connection, your own sense of self, impact, the big things in life. And when you are too caught up in all of the other stuff, either because you don't think the other stuff is important or because you simply haven't learned to pay attention to what actually matters, you end up having a life of regret. And this is something that, when we think of mental health, and since I brought up death, which again is just one of these topics of life that we're all going to go through it. Why are we afraid of talking about it? Why not prepare ourselves and be proactive about having these conversations about what actually matters, so that when we do get there, we are not afraid of it, right? And to me, one of the things that is really important for us to consider in terms of mental health is there's a lot of studies about, people who are, basically at the end of their life. They're a lot, end of elderly who are just, approaching that. There are a lot of studies about this subject of, at the end of your life, what do people really care about? And so there's a lot of studies on the elderly who are, in hospice, or, they're on their deathbed, basically, pretty much literally. And they're asked what actually matters. What actually matters, and reflecting on your life, what do you regret, or how do you see your life? And a lot of people have regret about not paying attention to things that actually mattered, right? Of wasting too much time and too much energy on the things that really don't, they're meaningless. So I feel like it's important for us to really consider the importance of that lesson, right? Listening to other people and what their experience is like at the end of life, so that we can learn from that and not do the same thing to ourselves. What actually matters? Let's pay attention to that. Let's start living that now, so that we can live a more fulfilling life. Any last additions that you want to add before we wrap up, Kalyan?
Yeah, absolutely, Margie. Good things we touched on. I do want us is to continues to ask yourself, like, what are my energy levels? How is my energy today? Journal it down, and be very much meticulously observe your daily patterns and try to constantly improve on them. Practice mindfulness, meditation, take breaks, and more importantly, do not rush with life. The thing I want to say is, whether it is in a scientific way or in a spiritual way, time, although the time is finite, it's important to be living a focused life, so that you can go into the depth of each of your observations, the things you touch on, the people you interact with, the people who care for you. Those are actually going to give you fulfillment and joy. So that's my message to the listeners.
Take the opportunity to reach out, to connect, to engage with us, to tell us, what do you want for yourself? Or what are you missing? Or what are the questions that you want answers to that you don't know how to access? Because this is the kind of work that he and I do. This is the kind of work that Kalyan and I do with our clients. And this is the kind of work that we want to continue doing, because this is where Kalyan's purpose and my purpose in life line up, right? It's helping other people to understand what that is for them, their purpose, their power, their life plan, their, who they truly are, their authentic self. So be sure to, take that into consideration moving forward. I want to thank you all for tuning in, for listening to another wonderful podcast. It's always such a pleasure talking to you, Kalyan. We always are feeding off of each other in such a beautiful way, with different examples that I feel like is such a powerful way to, take one concept, but be able to dissect it in different ways. And I love those conversations with you, because we always have that kind of complementary energy with each other. And I think that that's absolutely been a blessing. And I'm really grateful to, have had this time with you to do that. So thank you, everyone. Be sure to find us on social media, connect with us, engage with us, send us a message, tell us what was empowering for you to listen to on this episode. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everyone.